Hi, in this lecture, I am going to talk about user-defined classes. How do you write your own Python classes? Python has many built-in classes, turtle, string, list, and many other ones. You can define your own class to solve the problem. We've been writing functions to solve problem, but you can also write classes to solve problem. And the key point here is, remember object has properties, the state or data inside the class. Object has a method, function associated with the class, and object models the problem using properties and method. So we try to model the problem with the property and method, so that the data should and the method should model the problem we try to solve. For example, let's look at how do we define class structure first. To define class, you need to have a class using a class keyword with the class name. Use descriptive class name, and the convention is using the capital letter, the first letter being capitalized. The underscore underscore init underscore underscore is the constructor of the class. The constructor is used to create object. So in this case, we will add the attribute required for the class in the constructor. So in this example, I have two attributes or two instant variable, adder1 and adder2. And notice that the self, the self parameter reference, the self parameter mean reference to the object itself. And the self parameter does not count as the object. And all the instant variable, as you can see here, require self dot. Why? With the self dot variable name, this tells Python this is instant variable. You can still have local variable, and the local variable will not have self dot in front of it. So that's how Python distinguishes between a instant variable, a variable that was used within the class, or and the local variable is the self. And you could have a method, and the way you define the method is exactly the way you define the function that you have learned in the past few weeks. And the function, the first fields had to be self and a list of parameter. You could have a zero parameter or one or more parameter. And but keep in mind you need to have a self keyword here to make this as a method within the class. Otherwise, it would be like a just a plain function. So to instantiate an object, call the object name with parenthesis, which is very similar to how you call a function. So here I instantiate the object by calling the class name with the parenthesis. It's like you call the function. And in this example, the class name, the object class name, or the class name does not have any parameter. The constructor does not have any parameter, but constructor can have parameter too. So when I create this object, and now this object created, so my class, you can think of my class from the previous discussion is, this is a container. This container contains two properties, and they are adder1, adder2. This container contains two methods, and they are method 1 and method 2. So let's create a real class to see how it works. Let's create a point class. Point as in like a point in the SY plane that you learn in the geometry class. Um, create a point class to represent a point in a Cartesian coordinates. So if you look at point class, again in the Cartesian coordinates, the point has x and y coordinate. So in natural, to create a instant variable that model the x and y coordinate of the point. So this is the data I want to store for a point. Don't get over complicated. We only deal with one point here, not 2 points, not hundreds of points, just one single point. So that single point have an x and y coordinate. And we can instantiate the object by calling the point. And the P and Q are two different objects. So let's look at how this object works in PyCharm. So this is the point class, and I will put the I'm going to run the debugger just so we can do a line by line simulation. So I go to the point class. So when I call the point P equal to point, it will instantiate an object. In this case, it set the x and y attribute for P object, and then it will set x and y attribute for Q object. When I print P, it prints the memory location of P. When I print Q, it prints the memory location of Q. We remember the identity or the container is the memory location of the object. This on my computer is the memory location of the P object. And this is the memory location of the Q object. As you can see, they are not the same memory. So when I say if P is Q, it's false because they are not the same object. Okay? So it may be helpful to think of the class as a factory for making object, like a blueprint. Every time you call the constructor, you are asking the factory to make you a new object. As the object comes off the production line, you can initialization method is executed to get the object properly set up with the factory default setting. So when I create an object, every object looks alike in the beginning. You can make the object change as the program run depending on what you need to do. The combined process of make me a new object and get its setting initialized to the factory default setting is called instantiation. When you instantiate the object, you make a new object and get the object set up with the default value, getting ready for to use. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, constructor can have parameter too. Earlier example, I set the x and y to 0 by default, and I can create a constructor. Again, underscore underscore init is the constructor. I can have a parameter. In this case, there's only two parameters here. Self does not count as a parameter, but you need to have self to say this is a constructor. So I can create a point where the x and y coordinate is 5, 10. So let's do an exercise here. Write a person class. The person class constructor takes 3 parameters, name, age, and gender. Create and instantiate a person object. So I want to do a quick example just to see if you understand how to create an object. So I would say this is a person. Using the class, the keyword class, and the class is a person. And for this person, the constructor takes 3 parameters, name, age, and gender. And what is a constructor? Constructor is underscore underscore init. Now notice that when I do the open parenthesis, it will fill in the cell for me. The PyCharm will fill that in for me. So you don't need to type it. Name, age, and gender. It takes three parameters, and I will have created three properties. I will call the self.name is set to the name that will pass in. Self.age set to the age that will pass in, and self.gender set to the gender that will pass in. And that is enough to to create an object. For example, I can say person called Bob. Bob is a person name Bob, age 20, uh, and gender male. And I can run this person object. Well, right now it won't do anything. I just create an object and the program exited. We will add some more stuff to it to make this a person class kind of useful. So let's continue with the lecture. Every object has properties. So it is desired that user of the object can access the property. As I mentioned earlier, um, the user interact with the object through method. So in order for them to access the properties, we typically um, we will have a getter method, a method that return the property value, setter method, a method that set the properties, and other method that use um, the object properties to do something else. And I want to say this, especially for the people that come from like a Java or C++ programming. In Python, object properties can have access modifier. Um, Private data are data only the class itself can access, only within the class. There's no outside access. And the instance variable names have two underscore, such as self dot underscore underscore variable name. Protected data, a class and subclass can access the properties, but no outside external access. Instance variable have one underscore, such as self dot underscore name. Um, Public data, these are the public modifier. The instance variable can access from anywhere, even access from outside the class environment. So instance variable name do not have an underscore, then they are public data. And for what we do in this class, we are going to use public data for simplicity. So when you declare your variables do not need to have underscore at all. And be careful if you put underscore, Python treated them differently than without underscore. So let's add the getter and getter method. So we can add the getter method to the program. Like for example, I can get the x coordinate, I can get the y coordinate of the point class. This is a getter method to get the x and y coordinate. And let's see how it works in PyCharm. So this would be my point 3. And let me jot this down so you can see the whole thing. So this is the getter method. And so let me um, run the debugger. And so you can see line by line execution. Go to the console. So I create the point class, and you can see that the the um, the x and y coordinate was 7 and 6. So when I say print p.getX, you call the function, and this function return self.x. It return the the um, the class attribute or class property, and p.getY it return the class property y, which is 6 in this case. And because I want to say this because we declare the x and y attribute as a public access. You can directly access the data without the getter or setter method. I can say p.x to get the x value, p.y to get the y value. It's up to you. If you're using the public, but I like to using getter and setter, just this more object-oriented programming way. But in Python, because these data are public, you can access the instant variable directly. In the setter method, here's a setter method. In the setter method, and typically you have a parameter that change the state of the instant variables. I pass you the new x and new y that you can update the x and y coordinate in this case for the point class. And I also added other method. I call it distance from origin. This is using Cartesian coordinate. Yeah, this is the point here. 7 6. Okay, maybe this is 7 6. Distance from origin would be something like this. How long is this line? And the distance from origin basically using Pythagorean theorem. This is your x, and this is your y. The x is the length. The y in this case like the height of a right triangle. So I can use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared and take the square root of the sum would be the hypotenuse, and which is the distance from the origin. So let's see how this works in PyCharm. And I am going to just run this program so you can see the result. So the original point 76, the distance from origin is like 9.2195, and when I set the point x and y to 3 and 4, the distance from origin now is just a 5 using the Pythagorean theorem. So let's add a getter method to the person class, and also add set name and increment age method to the person class to modify person age, name, and age. Maybe the person got married, so the name got changed, and every year, whether you like it or not, we get older by 1. So let's go back to the person class and add a setter method. So to add the setter method, for example, I call it getName. And for the setter method, there's no parameter because I'm getting something. I just return self.name. I can also add getAge, and I will return self.age. I return the value because this is what I'm getting, right? I'm getting one thing. In that case, I'm getting the age. I can also get gender. Return self.gender. And I can also add set name because the name might have changed. And with the setter method, we have a new data. So don't forget a parameter. I typically call something with a new, like new name. So I would now the person name is set to the new name now. Whatever the new name is. And how do you increment the age? Well, when you increment the age, as the name implies, every year you get 1 year older, right? So your age is increment by 1, and that's your instant variable age get increment by 1. And notice that's how I use self.age plus 1 on the right hand side. If you want to refer to your age instant variable, you have to have a self dot in front of that. Otherwise, Python will think This is a local variable called age. If I do not have this age, as you can see, have a squiggly line. Python think this is a local variable called age, which you have not defined yet. And with and this is the most common error is students forget to put the self dot when it is needed. You can still have local variable just like this new name is a local variable. As you can see, there is no self dot in front of it because this is a local variable. So make sure you understand and distinguish between them. All right. So now I can print, like for example, Bob dot get name. I can print Bob name. I can print Bob age. I can also print Bob gender. Notice how we call this method. Do you remember the turtle? Alex dot forward, Alex dot turn, or right and left. These the turtle named Alex. I have a person named Bob. Same analogy. Dot method name to do something. And now maybe I just increment Bob age. So I will call Bob dot increment age, and now let print Bob new age, and let run this person class. So the person name is Bob. He's 20 years old, and he is male. And we increment Bob by 1. Now he's 21 years old. All right. I will continue with the discussion in the next lecture.